Alright, guys, well, welcome back to Tomboy Official. I'm back here recording. It's 2021 finally. Man, sorry about the background noise. I've got a noisy neighbor here who's playing some music. I like the music, but you know, it would be nice to maybe not have it at this very moment, but hopefully it's not too obnoxious to anybody else. I'm just gonna record through it. Hopefully it's not too much to handle. But yeah, so I hope everybody's New Year's going good. But yeah, today I just wanted to put up a recording to talk about gender topics. So this topic today is gonna be about something that I kind of just recently came across from Jess Weiner's Instagram. And Jess Weiner is I don't know how to describe Jess Weiner, because I don't know this person too well as far as like how they identify, but I came across Jess Weiner through a couple videos on YouTube a while back, and I'll link them to this clip. But the videos, one of them was it was mostly LA YouTubers. I remember Stevie Bobby was in it. There's this other lady that she used to date that was also on the Real L Word series from LA. I'm blanking on her name right now, but I'll find out all this info and put it in the description info below. But yeah, I came across them on YouTube, and initially the video was about lesbians. It was about, you know, would you date a straight woman? And then there was another one about like kind of about, I don't remember the exact title, but it was like, do you have like how do you feel about being queer or about being gay or something like that? Like, is it a positive experience, negative experience, something along those lines. And at that time, Jess was in the videos, those two videos, and I remember I was like, wow, this person seems pretty interesting with the thoughts that they were kind of providing. And this was like quite a few years back, and so since that time, Jess Weiner, you know, was, I don't know if Jess Weiner was on YouTube often, but Jess Weiner definitely had, or still has, a, you know, social group that's located in Los Angeles, in the queer community, and was connected with people like Stevie Bobby and some other YouTubers at that time, and appeared in the video. And I remember people were like, who's that person with the fedora, you know, because in the video Jess had this hat on, and I was thinking the same thing. So I remember I was like scrolling through the comments, and I was just like, who is that person, you know? And then I came across the name, and then eventually the Instagram, Jess Weiner, and finally was able to find some content. And since that time, Jess has transitioned, and is definitely a notable person in the trans community. And there was something that they mentioned that was very interesting to me, when I was just kind of, you know, taking more interest in their posts and looking at the kind of like older posts, but kind of like I was scrolling through some photos very recently, and I'm trying to find it right now. So the topic was about about trans people. And Jess Weiner is spelled JESSWEINER. And that's as one word. And a lot of the photos show Jess as, as in a transitioned, more modern pictures, updated pictures. And there was one, I'm trying to see, when was this posted? It was posted, oh my gosh, March 31st of 2020. So there was this post that went up. And it was interesting. So it was for the non-binary union, Los Angeles, NBULA. It almost looks like it says Nebula. And Jess is holding a trans flag and a different flag. And the main tagline says, transgender is a spectrum as infinite as there are souls. And that's a quote by Jess. And it says, you're under the transgender umbrella if you are transient in your gender, comma, have transitioned, comma, or have transcended past your assigned binary gender. And I thought that was really cool. Like, some of it kind of stuck out to me. Some ideas stuck out to me, especially the terminology of transcended past your assigned binary gender. I just really liked how that was worded. It really resonated with me, mostly because it was like, it wasn't taking an approach that's from, it doesn't take an approach that's from like a body dysphoria kind of approach. It doesn't take an approach like, oh, there's something wrong with you because you don't fit into this binary gender identity idea of, that people in society tend to push commonly, and at least in Western cultures. And I like that it said, it says transgender folks, FOLX, are the full spectrum product of human evolution. We are unfiltered, pure, organic, and raw. We are fluid. We are transcended. We are wholesome, holiness. We are here to heal the world. And I would like to read a lot of this post, actually. It says further, my personal visibility as a non-binary person has been difficult to translate. And this was written by Jess Weiner. All of this is probably because there's no language for us. You have to look closer to see us. I'm transmasculine, and in the beginning of my hormonal transition, I wanted to, in quotes, man up as quickly as possible. I wanted to be passing so being in the world felt easier. I felt really insecure about people not knowing how to refer to me or treat me because I wasn't tapped into my own identity language. It's easy to advocate for myself behind my personal little social screen, but in the physical word, the lack of safety and visibility makes it even harder and scarier. This year has been about owning my non-binary identity. Teaching people how to treat me, being more forgiving toward folks that don't understand, and not wavering in my conviction to be myself. Fluid in gender throughout my day, whether that is how I feel, present, or express myself. I try to practice forgiveness first and foremost. If I'm angry, I'm perpetuating the binary reaction to my own existence. I try and understand that the world doesn't revolve around my gender, just as my identity doesn't revolve around antiquated cultures, religions, or politics. We're all existing together for a reason, whether we like it or not. I celebrate myself in is some way, big or small, every day, everywhere I go. I think in some way. And this has about 21 comments on it. I'll probably leave a comment on here as well, even though this is a very old post. But something I like to do when I do have some spare time is just going through a lot of the collected content creators that I kind of follow. I follow so many people, but I don't necessarily actively like follow every updated thing. Sometimes I just come across something that someone posts that I like, and then I'll follow them, and then I might not tune back in for like ages. And so it's mainly because I'm busy, but when I do have free time and I'm just browsing around, I like to kind of go through stuff, like especially when I'm like, man, like my head's kind of like not really too stable on some thoughts. And I've kind of noticed when it, like, on a personal note, you know, when it comes to creating content for, you know, the Tomboy Official podcast and kind of thinking about things to post about, it's like, it's a lot to try to really unpack a lot of gender-related topics and thinking about who's going to be listening to this and who do I know and who do I actually talk about this stuff to in real life versus who doesn't really know and who might be coming across these things, and am I saying something that makes sense, or is it like inaccurate, or am I kind of like not too evolved yet in my, you know, ways of, you know, addressing certain issues. And what I really like to come across is, you know, not only the struggles. I mean, we hear a lot about the struggles, and sometimes it's good to see when somebody identifies with the struggle and you see something, you're like, yeah, like that happens to me too when I go into a freaking like female bathroom and people are like making a comment, or like you can't go into a club because you're wearing certain clothes that don't fit like the protocol that they need or whatever. And, you know, like different things that come up that are just stressful for people that aren't like, you know, it's just stressful things that come up that other people don't have to deal with this stuff. And it's hard to want to even like think about it or talk about it sometimes. But it's definitely something that, you know, your body and mind will tell you when it's ready to start a healing process on something, whether or not you really want to do it yet or not. Sometimes there's another part of you that might be ready, that's willing and wanting to just be like, dude, we're going to start working on this now. And it'll start coming up, you know, it'll disrupt your sleep. It might disrupt your day. It might disrupt your focus and your thoughts. And sometimes it's just good to get it out sometimes. And it's good to kind of also come across stuff that's identifying with the struggle. And then other times it's like, man, I just want something that's like positive and uplifting, that's like from somebody who gets me or gets at least something. You know, sometimes you can't, like, a lot of people can't like talk to their parents about this kind of stuff, or even their best friends, or like anything. It's kind of like, it's one of those topics that's, I think, almost even more so than your sexual orientation. Gender identity is kind of a whole different thing. And I know that sexual orientation can also be a tricky thing to navigate, but for some reason, and maybe it's just me, it might just be a personal opinion, a personal experience, but I think talking about gender identity and expression sometimes can be a lot more challenging than speaking to somebody about your sexual orientation or your sexual identity. I think there are reasons for that. I think, you know, in society, at least in Western cultures, we've really not talked for a very, very, very long time about gender. That's kind of, it's not new. I mean, you know, it's been in every culture forever. Like, if you look at any culture's history, especially when they have a written culture, a written language and documented information about like religious and spiritual beliefs and cultural beliefs and different roles that people play in societies. You'll come across a lot of this stuff. You'll come across a lot of identity related topics, and a lot of times, in Western culture, in classes, in school, college, lectures, textbooks and everything, they'll touch on it like for like a sentence or maybe a paragraph at most. You rarely get a chapter. You probably won't get a whole entire textbook or a whole entire class dedicated to gender. Maybe now, because I haven't been in school for a while, so maybe now those things exist more than they did before, but I still think it's kind of a new conversation that's been opened up, and from what I come across, and I don't know everything, so I could be wrong on this, but I think it hasn't been an open topic of conversation in our society until kind of more recently. If you even look at our history in just like modern history, with like artists like Prince, or the artist formerly known as Prince, the belated, who else, like David Bowie, even Michael Jackson, some of the, even like some basketball players from like the WNBA, Dennis Rodman from the NBA, different people who kind of were in the public eye that for some reason I find it interesting, RuPaul, different people, there's so many different people that are in the public eye that are celebrities that for some reason it's just interesting to me that they can kind of, I wouldn't say it's easier for them. But I think there's something about being a celebrity and having a, like not a binary gender expression that is kind of like, oh, you're a celebrity. Maybe people kind of chalk it up to kind of part of the entertainment factor or something. I feel like there's some aspect of it that for celebrities is different than it is for the average Joe. It's not like celebrated, and people aren't necessarily looking at, people in mainstream everyday life saying like, oh, like, yeah, I really like how that lady had her snapback, or something. It's kind of like, it's more like people tend to try to shame and like shun people who are kind of doing those things versus like celebrating it or accepting it or being like open-minded about it. But for celebrities, for some reason, it seems to be a little like, I'm not saying they don't get attacked, I'm sure they do, but it seems like there is a lot more like, like I've known a lot of people who have like prejudiced families who are like very like hardcore, like if it might be like religious or political or just their social beliefs, that they're very like, oh, like a man is a man and a woman is a woman and da 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 da, and all this kind of thing. And then they'll get so angry and upset about it. But then like they wouldn't mind listening to like RuPaul's like old albums or like, something like that. Or maybe going to a drag show might be a little bit too much, but still it might be more acceptable than like their child coming home in clothing that's stereotypically gendered towards one way or the other, things like that. But all that to say, which is a lot, and I get lengthy with my talks, this, but I just really like coming across positive things that talk about things, saying them in ways that are just very uplifting and wholesome and thought-provoking. I really like thinking about, this idea here that Jess Weiner posted about spectrum product of human evolution. And I do see that. I mean, I feel like in my lifetime, I have honestly seen an evolution in thinking. And maybe it's just because I live in Southern California. Maybe, I mean, my perspectives and views are definitely going to be skewed based on my own life experiences. And so that is really something to kind of take into account. And yeah, I would say a lot of times, like, honestly, you don't hear people saying things that are positive about gender expression. Usually it's like somebody has a problem, it's a problem, there's like an issue with them because they don't know what they're confused, or, you know, there's a lot of terminology attached to even talking about gender expression and identity that, you know, I feel like in the mainstream heteronormative kind of gender normative world, you know, that we kind of live in Western culture, there isn't really language that people know. And I noticed that when people don't have language to describe something, they kind of like latch on to something that is not necessarily what they actually believe, but it's just kind of like, oh yeah, this is what I should think. And so they start looking into things that way, and they just like write off everything else. So it's like, you know, we're kind of taught that way in our culture, and I think a lot of times it really rubs off on a lot of people negatively, and then, you know, just naturally people start having like a negative viewpoint, but a lot of times people don't challenge it. And when it comes to aspects of human evolution, I'm not saying that people can't believe in creation, or that they can't believe in, you know, if the word evolution really throws somebody off, I mean, I would say just like, you know, just the human condition of change, you know, like I've seen that in my own lifetime, in my 37 or so years. I've seen, you know, going from like strict, just like, we gotta follow things by the book and by the rules and don't think outside of these boxes, and then people are now kind of more open-minded and at least challenging things. If their minds aren't open, they're at least open to the idea about you know, thinking differently, or noticing that other people might think differently, or not needing everyone to think the same way, or having friends and being allies of someone who's different, even if they don't fully understand it, and trying to like hold like an open space for those conversations and those topics to come up, and just kind of trying to like observe another person's life perspective and their view, and see how they're navigating life, and try to just understand it instead of judging it and saying, you need to do things like I do, you need to do what I was taught because I'm right and you're wrong, and until you're doing everything like I do it, I don't even want to listen to you or talk to you, and I'm going to hassle you about the things you do differently. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. We're all so diverse, and every level that anybody has, from like your hair color to your preferences in music, or your likes and dislikes of different types of foods. I mean, there's certain things that people aren't gonna really say, like, you know, if you have like an eclectic taste in music or art types of art, or types of books and reading, and like different types of hobbies, nobody's gonna be like, you only need to have 2 hobbies. That's not appropriate to have like 80 hobbies, or like it's not appropriate to be like on a spectrum about certain things. But with certain other things, when it comes to gender or sexual orientation and things like this, even like ethnicity and race and stuff like that, it's kind of interesting how it's like you can pick to be one, but then it's like a lot of us are so mixed with so many things. It's like we identify with something based on what we're told and what we identify with and what the world tells us. But, you know, you can track your ancestry back to who knows where, you know, and, you know, like, who says where it stops, where you can consider yourself one ethnicity versus the other. I mean, society kind of decides that, you know. I can't call myself an indigenous, you know, person necessarily, you know, like I can't call myself a Blackfoot or Crow indigenous person, but I have that in my heritage. I definitely do. On my great grandparents on my mother's side, some of them were half, and so it's there, you know. I have indigenous cultures completely on my dad's side, and it's all there. But you know, when society looks at me, they're going to say I'm one race. They're going to say I'm one ethnicity. They're going to say you're American, you're Black, you're African American. They're not going to go further past that, And same thing for some other groups of people. You might be, say, Mexican, for example, and even have like Asian heritage, like way back. And, you might not call yourself Chinese or Mongolian or something, but then it's like, that might be in your heritage. And so I just find it interesting, certain things, that's just an example in addition to gender, where it's like, it's very limited. We're very limited in our choices that we're taught, and we don't really tend to think outside of it. And if we start challenging it and doing too much on the end of, trying to think for ourselves, or like open up our own minds and psyches about who we really feel that we are, then people are like, you're gonna get confused, you're just confused, or you're identifying, like, nobody can tell you how to identify, I mean, there is a certain, I'd say within some, confines, there is like a boundary there somewhere. If you're clearly not something at all, you kind of can't really identify with it, because it wouldn't really make that much sense. I mean, you could say the words, but I mean, but if you don't like intrinsically like feel it, and sense it, and that's another thing, is being like open to your own senses about things. I mean, you can have, the five senses, of your sight and touch and hearing and whatnot. But you also have other senses that, you have to tune into yourself about, that are harder to explain, because those are things that you can't really test it on like a wavelength. There's no like, I don't know what you would call it. There's no scale or measurement scale about it. You can't hook me up to a machine necessarily and decide how I identify my gender, how I express it, how I present it. But you can hook me up to a machine and test my hearing. You can test my sense of touch sensitivity. You can test, eyesight. Some things you can't really test, but you can sense them in another way. It's like, it's a different type of sense that only you kind of know. And nobody can really tell you otherwise. Sometimes it really can help to take the language out of things, and the pressure to have like a word for something, the pressure to have a label for something, and just think about how you actually feel about it, and tune more into like your emotions about the whole experience, and the experiences you have in different settings, the experiences you have by yourself internally, and try to kind of flesh it out for yourself first. And you don't really have to have the words for it, I don't think. And I think that all kind of shows this process of transcending, right? It's kind of like, you can be fluid, you can transcend. And I often wonder if just our society just limiting things for so long, making things black and white and everything fitting into nice little neat tiny boxes for so long, like Western culture has been that way for I don't know how long, as long as I've known about things that I've studied. One thing that's kind of interesting that you see in Western culture, say for example, if you read like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, very, 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 very extremely tragic. The word tragic doesn't even do justice to what actually people have had to experience and go through, unfortunately, just for some of us to even be where we are now in our lives on this planet. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is, Western culture, when people came in and they were raiding and pillaging and, destroying other cultures. And the cultures that they destroyed a lot of times didn't have like written languages, or if they did, a lot of the writings got destroyed too. But a lot of what is still available is, there's still some information available about people's beliefs and about people's identities and how they presented and how they navigated the world. And there is a lot of information about different gender related topics that we, in our supposedly more evolved culture, as we've been taught, which I don't even believe that. I used to maybe at one point think that more modern meant better, but I think it got to a point where things got so regimented that other like kind of more esoteric thinking and more open-mindedness types of ways of viewing the world got really, really just kind of erased almost. And I wouldn't say that they were erased in the people. They were just erased as in the ideas, because of the mainstream people that were taking over. They basically erased or attempted to erase all of these things. And so what ended up happening is that you have these ideas that, there's a male and there's females and that's it, like that's all that really exists. And there's no like, other way to describe male, female, man, woman. That's it. There's nothing else, but that's coming from a different viewpoint. It's coming from kind of like a different way of looking at the world, that not everybody had that viewpoint before. And now that view, Western views have really dominated a lot of the world, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're right. They're just dominant. It doesn't mean that it's correct or accurate. It's just dominant. So I think what happens is that people see on the outside with Western culture and other cultures that are kind of more outspoken and trying to like dominate and overtake everything. I'm not saying I believe that that's like a good way to kind of live life and to kind of navigate in this universe, to like be running around taking over stuff and killing and stuff like that. I don't really believe in that, but I know it exists and it happens all the time, and it hasn't stopped in our whole lifetime. I think somebody was saying in our whole lifetimes, there has never been a period of time when there hasn't been war. And I'm like, geez, that's sad, but humans do that. Humans go to war and they kill and, they do terrible things. But, the part that we don't benefit from, I mean, we don't really benefit from that either, but the part that we really don't benefit from is all of these ideas that get erased, that seem like, a lot of this seems like, okay, we're thinking about these new topics and these new things, but I'm pretty sure that in other societies before this whole Western idea of taking over and trying to be in charge and all this, before all that started happening, there were more fluid ways of looking at gender before all of this. And so that's something that I find interesting, is that we're kind of re-experiencing or trying to like rebuild this gender, conversation, trying to open this conversation back into society, into the mainstream society, where it hasn't been for ages. It hasn't been for like hundreds and hundreds of years. People haven't been really touching on these topics in a major way in society. I mean, you see it a little bit here and there, but people kind of tend to ignore it. But lately you're seeing it more, in mental health settings. There's more questions about, if you're doing like an assessment and they're trying to like figure out your cultural backgrounds and all your kind of like different categories, like just to get a greater picture for who you are, who the person is that they're actually trying to treat or serve. you see different questions coming up that weren't there, like, even 10 years ago. Like, people weren't asking your sexual orientation, your gender identity, all these different ethnicity questions and things. Like, they would ask kind of more towards what I heard. It was more towards what the census needed to know. And so, like, I noticed in my own lifetime a switch where they really started focusing on like Hispanic, Latinos, Hispanic, Chicanos, and like they were kind of focusing on like breaking down that, but they weren't doing that before. But then eventually you started seeing that popping up more on like different demographics questions. All of a sudden they were like, are you, they don't do that for every category. Like for black, you're like black or African American maybe at the most, but they're not asking you like what's your indigenous black background of like tribal nations and things. Like nobody's asking you that kind of stuff. For Native American categories, a lot of times, sometimes, or indigenous groups, sometimes they'll look at, like Samoan, like Micronesia, Polynesian cultures, Pacific Island, different, groups of people. Sometimes you'll see a breakdown there. Like it's broken down into more categories nowadays, more than it was before too. And yeah, the same's happening for gender. They're kind of breaking it down a little bit more. Sexual orientation, they're kind of breaking it down a little bit more. But then you'll notice there are other categories where they still never really break it down. Like for white people, you don't really see a whole, like they want to know, are you white? Are you white and Hispanic or not? They don't ask you if you're like Irish background or like English background, or, are you from like an Eastern European country? Are you mixed with some Asian group? Like it's not inclusive enough still, but you are seeing it more and more. And so that's something that I do find good, that, people are kind of expanding more their ideas of like these different categories and groups. And gender just happens to be one of them. In all honesty, gender is just one of those categories that humans have to navigate that, isn't usually broken down into, into fine-tuned detail. Up until kind of more recently, it's been like, are you a man or are you a woman? Like, what genitalia were you born with, and what clothing section do you shop in? Or what clothing section fits the genitalia that we think you should be shopping in that category. It's like, that's kind of what it looks like. But there are other resources with the internet, with younger generations, with, millennials, with all sorts of things, with people just presenting their own experiences, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. You're getting a version of the real human, perspective of things. And yeah, a lot of times people are presenting a type of a version to you, but it's more accurate maybe than having somebody else present what they think everybody is categorized as. So now you're seeing all these other people like, hey, there's no category for me in this list, so I'm gonna make my own. And then other people see it and then they're like, hey, like, I'm gonna get on this train too, because I identify this way too, so let me give my 2 cents. And it just kind of grows and expands from there. But we're seeing an evolution with things. We're seeing a change and, of different things like that. And I do think it's very pleasant and very positive. I know it bothers some people. People get bothered by this. They don't like the challenge of having to think, And as Jess Weiner puts it, the lack of safety and visibility makes it even harder and scarier. I mean, I've talked about, experiences, being outside in the world with, people who might not have they might not represent their gender or present their gender in a way that's maybe obvious on the binary to people who don't know them. That can be a very scary situation going out in the world. And when people don't know what to do with you, or don't know what to say or do, or like there's no like part of our society where it's like there's even a protocol. Like, how do you address somebody who can't use this or that bathroom, you know, in a restaurant? And then if, you know, it just creates so many different, you know, challenging scenarios on everyone's end, just because nobody talks about it, and because we don't have like a protocol or any kind of cultural method of kind of navigating these things. We just kind of have been pushing it under the rug for like so many generations that it causes a lot of challenging things to come up. And, you know, that can be sad to see. But at the same time, we see the opposite, where there is a lot of change and there is a lot of positive, you know, things coming out that really are helpful to focus on. So I really like the idea of transcended. That to me really sticks out. It's really kind of like an idea of looking at the world that's saying that, like, you know, maybe it's possible that some people just don't fit into these boxes. As we know, as we see, we don't fucking fit into these boxes. Like, it doesn't make any sense. We've been taught to think this way, but it hasn't always been that way. Like, people haven't always thought this way. This isn't a new, necessarily beneficial, good way of thinking about the world, to put things in such strict boxes. I know that we need it, you know, for statistics. We need it for, you know, just easily kind of stereotyping and just figuring out something. Our brains work really well with automatic, you know, so anything that we can put on an automatic, the least amount of thinking possible, the brain actually loves this. For a lot of people, it's like, if I have to challenge the way I think about this thing, that's too much for me. I need to know, what color is this car? Is it white? Is it black? Is it gray? I don't need like a full, like, lengthy conversation about it. I just need to look at it and identify. And that's helpful for quick, snappy decision making. That's one benefit of the human brain, is that it can kind of categorize things and make a quick, snappy judgment and make a decision. And it helps us, you know, it's helped humans get this far in our, you know, existence. But also it hinders things too when there are areas that we don't really think a lot past, and that we don't really look at in more depth. Sometimes it really takes a lot of strength and a lot of focus, and, you know, people would rather tune out and watch Netflix and watch television and not really think about these ideas and think about the world that they're living in, and just go through it and zoom through it and zoom past everything, and not really live in it and be in it in the moment and figure out what's happening at every point in time. That's hard. It's really hard to do, especially when you don't have to do it. You can easily just categorize every freaking thing along the route and just go. You know, it's efficient. It's an efficient method of getting things done and navigating, you know, your life, to be able to kind of efficiently, you know, process things really quickly. And it can help in some aspects, but in some other aspects, it's not really helpful. And I think with more and more people taking more time to sit down and think things through and expand like different levels of consciousness and expand different ways of thinking and of looking and of experiencing the world, you know, that's the way that people really transcend. You know, it's it is, like Jess Weiner says, it's very difficult to translate. And the comment that probably because there's no language for us, you have to look closer to see us. You know, like sometimes, and also it's kind of a personal thing too, very much so is. Like when you first meet somebody, it's hard to be like, talking about certain things. Like if you don't identify, say, as a female, but you might look that way to most people who just pass by you, and, you know, people are going to start calling you she and ma'am and miss and lady and different terms that you might not like at all. And how long does that go on, you know, before, you know, when is comfort developed when you say something about it, if that's not how you identify or how you see yourself, or if somebody asks you, like, what's too much of a boundary to cross? Are you crossing someone else's boundary by saying, hey, you're like, when you first meet them and they're like, hi, and like, hi, this is Jill, you know, she's my friend, and they introduce you to their friend. I mean, is that the best time to just be like, oh, by the way, I know my name is Jill, and somebody told you that's my name, but I don't really identify with that name, and this is the name I prefer, and this is the way that I actually identify myself, and my pronouns are not she and her. I actually prefer these other pronouns, you know. And to some people, that's not even a conversation that they're used to having. So now it's like this person who unfortunately is just like, somebody just identifies them in some way, and then you're kind of stuck having to like fend for yourself in different situations. And to everyone, you know, there's no right or wrong answer for any of this. It's individual, it's situation by situation, it's how you feel. Sometimes you just don't feel like people, you know, that you don't know being up in your business. Sometimes you don't want to talk about it and you're just trying to get through line at the grocery store. Sometimes you're not like wanting to really talk about it, or sometimes you do want to talk about it, or maybe you never want to. It can be a hard thing. So I know it's challenging. It's always going to be a challenge to everybody, and but it's definitely possible to get through it, and definitely it's going to help to look at things in a very open perspective in life. Just kind of keeping the mind as open as possible when thinking about yourself and when thinking about these topics. Again, it doesn't mean you're confused if you have questions. It doesn't mean you're confused if you know, nobody can tell you that you're confused. If you're confused, you'll know that you're confused. And if you're not confused and you're just challenging things and you're thinking about things and you're trying to figure it out and manage things, you know, there's nothing wrong with questioning things, and trying to kind of get a better sense of the world for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It doesn't make you like a weird person, or like, oh, I'm strange or odd or like different, or, you know, like, you're not necessarily different. I mean, everybody has aspects of themselves that, you know, relate to their gender, their presentation, their identity. Some people really fit in that stereotypical box. I would say most people don't. There's probably at least a couple categories for everybody, subcategories within the gender that they were, you know, the sex that they were born with, and the gender that they identify with, and all the topics within those. I'm pretty sure that there are some that don't fit the stereotypes for everybody. And, I have a very straight heterosexual masculine male father that likes Queer Eye for the straight guy. I wouldn't say that my dad's like the most open-minded person when it comes to like gender and sexual orientation and things like this, but I mean, he'll watch Queer Eye, so it's like stuff like that that's kind of like, okay, like, people can tune into different stuff that it's just interesting to me. It's interesting to me. It doesn't mean he's necessarily like attracted to men. But yeah, I mean, like different things like that. Like there are different aspects of every person that is really on a spectrum. And that's the important part, is that there are multiple spectrums in a lot of different areas of life. Almost everything's on a spectrum. I I mean, it's hard to really think of something that's not on a spectrum, really. And when it comes to your own identity, it's really going to be hard to find something that's not on a spectrum. I mean, some things are black and white, yes or no. But, you know, coming from a scientific research kind of background in psychology, you kind of learn, it kind of depends how you ask the question that leads to what options of answers somebody has. So if somebody asks you, were you born with female genitalia? That can be a yes or a no for most people. But it's not a yes or a no for every single person. Because some people have a variation of different types of genitalia they were born with. So that's not always a yes or a no, right? Even though it seems like it should be on the face of it, it seems like it should be a yes or no. Versus somebody asking you, what type of genitalia were you born with, or how do you identify with that genitalia? You know, those are different questions that are going to result in different responses from a person. And those responses themselves can also change over time. It doesn't mean just because somebody picked it this day, 20 years, they're going to be saying the same thing. And that's okay too, you know, like, you know, people just really want to get upset about not understanding things without thinking it through more, and not thinking, you know, more along the lines of, you know, what's actually going on and what's actually happening. So, I don't know. I feel pretty conflicted about a lot of things when it comes to gender and what to even talk about with it, because it's really just a challenging topic to really speak about. On so many different levels it can be challenging. And I really like how Jess Weiner really points out that, you know, there can be a transcendence, there can be, you know, a fluidity. There are these things that come up that are definitely going to be scary things. There are definitely going to be insecurities when it comes to interactions with other people, and insecurities with you thinking about your own self. But I do like how Jess Weiner mentions, you know, celebrating yourself as you are, you know, and not being afraid of that, and not having to apologize for it. I mean, people are going to try to make you feel like crap about things anyways, but usually when they do that, it's usually because they just don't think that much. It hurts to think for some people. It hurts to kind of challenge ideas, and they don't want to think about it, so they'll want to make you feel bad because they don't understand, and it's hard for them to try to even start understanding. And that is where their anger and their frustration and their prejudice comes from, is just a fear of trying to do the process of understanding something. Because if you ask people other topics about spectrums, you know, like even like ethnicity and race, things like that, you know, like there are distinct things that we do in our culture that don't really fit with what is actually the human existence. It doesn't really fit that. We say it does, and we act like, oh, this is this way, this is that way, but it isn't. A lot of things really are just on a spectrum. And so it can help to kind of remember that. And when people start kind of getting on your nerves, kind of trying to have a view of, you know, understanding what's actually happening. Usually what's actually happening is just the other person just doesn't know what to do. They don't know how to figure this out. They don't know how you know, how you identify, how they identify. They don't think about identity, and for some reason they're scared of it, and so they're going to get mad and they're going to lash out at you. But it doesn't make you wrong, and, you know, it doesn't make you less than. It's just them and their shortcomings with not really understanding and not wanting to understand or being open to understanding. It's hard for people to challenge themselves. We all have, if you think about any perspective of your own that gets you kind of heated, you know, when you're thinking about like, oh man, like this person said that to me, And it's like, usually the heatedness is going to come from, just those things. It's usually going to come from not understanding that other person's perspective. Like, why the hell did they do that? Why would they say this? Like, what are they acting this way for? And being angry about it, not being able to understand why they're doing it. If you're a nice person, and whatever, negative reaction someone could be having that doesn't really yield a negative reaction, whatever the situation was, it doesn't even add up. Now, if someone's mad at you and you did something to them, you're probably not going to be too hurt about it, because you're like, dude, I know why they're mad, because I said this stupid thing to this person. And of course, anyone would be pissed off if somebody said that to them. So it makes more sense, right? So things like that, it's easy to kind of look at your own life and see like what happens for you when you get upset and why that is, and then taking that further and looking at another person and saying, hey, that crosses over to other people too. Other people react similarly, and they don't know it. They don't even know why they're reacting in those ways. They'll say, I'm reacting this way because I'm right. I'm reacting this way because these are my political views. I'm reacting this way because my religion tells me to. That is, you can't even argue with that, because they're basically just saying, I'm reacting this way because I don't want to think more. I was taught this way. This is how it is. I don't want to think more about this. I don't want to put more energy and effort into this. I don't want to challenge my own views. It hurts. It hurts a lot of people, It creates a lot of, what's it called? Cognitive, I'm blanking on the word, but it's like an unrest type of feeling. When you cognitively just, you start challenging your ideas, it's a form of stress that comes up for people when they're like challenging something that they never really had to challenge before. That creates a level of stress and then anger towards the person making them challenge these things. People are more likely to do that than they are to just say, I'm going to take a week to sit and delve into this topic before I even comment on anything here. I'm going to take a week to just kind of delve into this because it's making me mad and I want to figure out why. I want to figure out if there's something that I'm not looking into that's making me angry here. People don't usually do that, but if they did, I think they would find a lot of answers and be a lot happier. That's my 2 cents on it, but and also the forgiveness aspect and not being, ashamed or feeling bad about having any kind of emotions about something. If you feel bad about something, you feel bad about it. Go ahead and feel bad about it, If you feel bad about yourself and, you feel misunderstood, that's not the wrong way to feel. That's just how you feel. And it's okay to own that. And if you don't want to feel that way, there are methods to address it. And if you want to just, sometimes it just helps to just be like, this is how I feel. And it's fine for me to feel this way, even if it's a crappy feeling, even if it's a way you don't necessarily want to feel, but you feel that way. Sometimes it can help to just be like, this is how I feel about myself. This is how I feel about my gender. This is how I feel about how I present. This is how I feel about these topics. And it's such a broad idea. Transcendence is such a broad thing. But I never really thought about it too much when it comes to gender. There are a lot of things I haven't really thought about, but I'm really, trying to challenge how I kind of view things, and I find it helpful. It can be a little tiring, but I'd recommend it. And yeah, if you guys listen this far, you're troopers. Yeah. I do really greatly appreciate anybody listening to these recordings. It's, I hope it's helpful for people. I'm trying to record based on things that people seem to want to listen to, and the gender related topics seem to be topics that, people really want to, kind of listen to. So thanks for that. And definitely engage, with the material. If there's something you want to comment on, if you like something, if you want to subscribe, if you want to go on Instagram, Tomboy Official IG. I'm just trying to put out information and content that is beneficial and useful for people, especially on thought-provoking topics related to, the tomboy type world. So whatever that might be, it's pretty broad still right now for me to categorize things, but I hope it's helpful, and thanks for listening.